Hi everybody, what a massive day for Beatles fans. The original 1970 Let It Be movie is finally available for us to watch. And it looks great. I've just finished watching it. I've made a lot of notes. I'm going to share my thoughts with you about it. And I want to hear your thoughts as well down in the comments. So, of course, we got Peter Jackson's massive Get Back back in 2021. And that was fantastic. I am going to do some comparisons between that and the Let It Be movie during this. But this original movie, it's what I'm seeing now is that a lot of the decisions that Peter Jackson made about his Get Back movie, I think now are fully justified when you have Let It Be available as a separate option. I'm going to talk about that more as I go through. But let me just sort of go through the main things that I picked out from the Let It Be movie. So first of all, you will find that if you watch this on Disney Plus, it starts off with a brand new interview, probably from the last year or so, between Peter Jackson and Michael Lindsay Hogg, the original producer of the Let It and director of the Let It Be film. So Peter Jackson, of course, and his team have cleaned this up fully, but based on Michael Lindsay Hogg's original film. And it's about 4.5 minutes, that interview. There's nothing particularly revelatory there. I think that interview is available on YouTube if you want to go and watch that. But there's nothing massive there apart from Peter Jackson just sort of discussing a few little bits and pieces about the film. So the thing that you immediately notice when the film starts, it is in the original ratio, so it's not going to fill a full widescreen television, for example. So that means you're not going to be getting parts of the image cut off. So that's great that they have stuck to that original ratio. As well, the cleanup looks magnificent. There was a lot of criticism on Get Back about just how much they'd cleaned up the footage. There was talk of it being sort of looking waxy, for example, when you looked at Paul's hair, for example. This looks a lot more natural, and I believe that was a specific request from Michael Lindsay Hogg to Peter Jackson. He wanted it to retain more the look of the original film, and it really looks nice. They've done a great job of cleaning that up. Now, when you watch this movie, I've been trying to put myself into a sort of 1970 frame of mind, which I don't have first-hand experience of. I wasn't alive then, but I'm trying to think of how it might have been viewed at the time. And the thing with the Let It Be movie, it's always been sort of thought of as drab, depressing, and the story of the Beatles breakup. And I think drab could certainly apply to copies of it that people have seen. I, for example, used to own a bootleg VHS video of it that I bought at a music fair back in the early 1990s, and it looked terrible. It looked awful. It was dark. And I think that affects the opinion of the movie that you have. Now, I watched that on VHS back in the early 90s. I haven't seen this since. So I'm going into this having not seen this movie for over 30 years and really not remembering anything about it apart from the bits that I'd seen on Anthology and, for example, on Get Back. So the very beginning of the film, when you see Mal Evans and Kevin Harrington, his assistant, sort of bringing some of the equipment onto that large stage at Twickenham, it is a very sort of downbeat intro. There's a big dark grey background there. You then see Paul playing a beautiful piano piece that I'd often wondered what it was called and where it was from. I can tell you in the credits, it's just credited as Paul's piano intro. But it's a very sort of sombre piece of music. Paul's there looking serious playing it. Ringo looks completely gloomy sat next to Paul. So that first bit of the movie does feel a bit down. But from then on, it just isn't. I certainly didn't think so anyway. So if it's first impressions of being in 1970, the Beatles have just broken up, and you see this sort of drab-looking set, Ringo looking glum, sombre music, then I can understand why that impression would be given. But I think it really deserves being rewatched now. It's definitely more disjointed than Get Back. One thing that I really loved about Get Back was the sort of diary format of it. 2nd of January, this is what's happening, okay? And you see a diary of that day, and only then do you move on to the 3rd of January. It helps you to really understand what was going on and why, as well as in Get Back, the on-screen credits sort of helping to tell the story as well. You don't get any of that in Let It Be. There is nothing, there are no on-screen credits or text or anything about what's happening, why is it happening, why are they in this studio, what's the ultimate aim of it, who are these other people who are around. So, for example, I'm thinking that 1970 moviegoers would have seen people like Michael Lindsay Hogg on screen. There's only the very briefest glimpse of Glyn Johns, the producer. You wouldn't have known necessarily who these people were. I think probably back in 1970, a lot of Beatles fans, especially the more casual fans, might not have even known who Mal Evans was. You know, who's this big friendly giant of a guy wandering around screen. So I think Get Back helps to tell the story a lot better of what was going on. Let It Be, you sort of really have to work it out for yourself. One thing I was surprised at watching Let It Be now, there's only about 22, 23 minutes of footage from Twickenham inside that big film studio before they move on to the Apple Studios on Savile Row. There is absolutely no reference at all to George leaving the band, as is heavily covered in Get Back, or why they then move on to the Apple Studios. And another thing, you know, if you didn't know who Billy Preston was, who's the guy playing the keyboards from this point onwards? Why is he there? What's he doing? And I really wondered, once it got to round about the Savile Row point of view, and I knew that the sort of darkness of the Twickenham sessions had passed us by, it really made me think, why on earth has this movie been buried for so long by the Beatles? You know, why was it so controversial? The only real thing there that you spot as a viewer is that incident between Paul and George. You know, I'll play what you want me to play, or I won't play at all. Whatever it is that'll please you, I'll do it. And even that's sort of quite tame, really. From a viewer's perspective, I'm sure from George's point of view, from Paul's point of view, it would have been a major thing going on in their lives. And especially if you think back to May 1970 when this movie was released, it had just all fallen apart. Paul especially, with the conflict that he had with the other Beatles around the release of the Let It Be album, and how that was sort of conflicting with his solo album, the McCartney album coming out. They've obviously got completely different memories to us, and it was like probably one of the darkest periods of their lives. We maybe don't see that so much as viewers, so as a viewer you think, you know, what's the problem here? But one or more of the Fabs or their estates have blocked the release of this for so many decades now, and it must be those memories of the time. But looking at it objectively as a viewer, you don't really see that. There's a passage in the movie where sort of from when they're doing Susie Parker, that great rock and roll number, through to George doing For You Blue, talk of the Maharishi. Paul's talking about having just watched some footage of them from nearly a year beforehand in India, onto Besame Mucho, Octopus's Garden, Shake, Rattle and Roll and Dig It. It is just pure joy, is this movie, and that's a whole chunk of it there that is just a fantastic watch. I really, really loved that. You've then got full performances of Two of Us, Let It Be and Long and Winding Road, which of course were left out of Get Back, and that upset quite a few people. This is one of those instances where I think you can now see that Peter Jackson was probably justified in not repeating. He wanted to let the Let It Be movie still have relevance and not be made irrelevant by his film, and you can really see that there. I think because it's been about 2.5 years since Get Back came out to us now having proper access to Let It Be, in that gap we've had lots of time to think, well, why hasn't Get Back got this? Why hasn't it got that? Now that we've got both, I think it's great that they can coexist without really treading on each other's toes so much. There's another great example of that coming up that I'm going to move on to soon. But you see Two of Us, Let It Be, The Long and Winding Road, those videos that they recorded the day after the rooftop concert. But again, you don't realise that from watching Let It Be. They're just there in the movie before you ever see the rooftop concert. So I think Get Back, you can learn a lot more about the chronology of what happened. Let It Be, again, you've got to work it out for yourself. The film is very obviously Paul-centric. It just is, but that reflects the reality of the time and what was happening. Paul was very much driving that band. at the time. And also, before it gets to the rooftop gig, I think you see a lot more of George in the Let It Be movie than you do of John. John's very quiet. I've said for a while, I don't think it was a great month for John. Paul's knocking out classics here. John has Don't Let Me Down, which is obviously brilliant. But apart from Don't Let Me Down, I think John really doesn't do himself justice in this movie. You've got Across the Universe, which was a song from a year before. You've got the one after 909, which I love, but that was a song that was probably 10 years old by that point. And it really leaves you with Dig a Pony and Dig It. I don't think John is operating at the same level as Paul in January 1969, and that really comes across here. Until you get to the Let It Be video, I don't remember seeing any footage at all of Let It Be being worked on, of Get Back being worked on. You don't see Get Back until the rooftop performance at the end. So you don't really know that they were songs that were being worked on at all. So I thought that was interesting to see. And you don't know that there's going to be a rooftop concert until they actually step out onto the roof and you see Ringo's drum kit there and the amps and everything. There's no mention of it. And I just wondered, going back into that 1970 frame of mind, which, again, I wasn't there at the time, so I don't know this, but would the general public, apart from the ones who were down on the street and heard it, would they have even known that there was a rooftop concert? I'm sure the avid Beatles fans of the times would have done, but I wonder whether the more general Beatles fan would have even known that that was a thing that had happened. During the rooftop concert, you get occasional views of the public, and when it cuts to the public, they ramp up the reverb on the song so that it sounds a bit more like it would have done to them. And I know, again, that was a big criticism of Get Back, was the fact that Peter Jackson told it as a story, really, of it was the story of what the people's reaction was to the rooftop concert, the police arriving, which you do see in this, but you just you don't hear it, the police talking at all. You just sort of see them arrive and go up onto the roof. So again, now that we've got Let It Be in conjunction with Get Back, my own opinion is it fully justifies what Peter Jackson did in telling it as a story and giving us that alternate view. You see the bare bones of it in Let It Be in terms of what was happening with the police. You get the full story with Get Back, and I love that we've got both of those views. But I really do think if we get a physical release of the Let It Be movie, and there's no word on that yet of either if or when that's going to happen, I really hope that they will include a full unedited rooftop concert, preferably on vinyl, on CD, maybe as an extra in a Blu-ray or DVD package. Again, it could be one of those things where we thought it was crazy a couple of years ago when the Let It Be box came out that wasn't in there. And I believe it was planned to be in there originally. Did they pull it out because they knew that longer term they had a plan to actually release it with the Let It Be movie? We can only hope. And if that's the case, then all will be well in the world. Well, this tiny little piece of the world anyway. But it was... We've just had that annoying sort of few years gap where we haven't had that. So we get to the end of the movie. Now, in the original Let It Be movie, as it was released in 1970, when John does his bit about, I'd like to thank you on behalf of ourselves and the group, and I hope we pass the audition, it just comes up with the end on screen in a kind of Beatles logo, drop T kind of way. And then the movie finishes. You don't see that logo at the end of the movie. I would have liked to have seen that. I think that was that graphic was very much of the time, and I think it would have suited it as it's supposed to be the original film. It would have been nice to have that there. What it does then do, it goes into a brand new end credits section that shows you the 1970 credits for the movie and the 2024 restoration credits for both the sound and the audio. With audio played behind it, and what you've got is an early take of Oh Darling, which of course they were practicing, rehearsing, writing some of the stuff that would then appear on Abbey Road later on. So you hear an early take of that. You hear, I think it's an old blues song, which sounds to me as though it's called I'm Moving On Down the River Rhine. So you hear a bit of a jam of that. And then you hear something that it took me a little while to figure out what it was, and then it clicked. It's Paul's I Lost My Little Girl, the first song he ever wrote, but it's like a really sort of groovy jam of it, and I don't think I've heard that before. I don't think that version was in Get Back. If it was, I've forgotten, but I don't think it was there. I think that was new to me, hearing that. So that was good. And so there's a few minutes of end credits and that, with those songs behind it. So I really, really enjoyed Let It Be. To me, it wasn't gloomy. It's got that very quiet, somber opening. And once you move past that initial minute, 2 minutes, I think the film was a joy. You know, it's, again, I can understand in 1970 you're going to watch it, the Beatles have just broken it up, and that's what you're watching it in that frame of mind. 54 years later, personally, I wasn't watching it in that frame of mind. We know that Abbey Road came afterwards. We know that they had that glorious album to finish with. Again, looking at Let It Be, you wouldn't know. The casual fan might not even know, did this happen before Abbey Road? Did it happen afterwards? I think the information was probably more difficult to come by at that time about exactly what context this was placed in. There's nowhere does it say it was January 1969, for example, in the Let It Be movie. But I really enjoyed it. I really hope there's a physical release. If we can have Get Back and Let It Be alongside each other, then I think it would be the most magnificent document of one of the most mythical months in rock history. Just everything that happened in that month. It was absolutely fantastic. So I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that Let It Be is now properly in great quality in my life. What do you think? Let us know down in the comments. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.